I've been and who I am, all the ways I've grown.
This isn't self-help, it's a full-on rebirth. Welcome to Girl Wake Up, the podcast for women who are done playing small, staying silent, or living by rules they never wrote. I'm Amy Polacko, journalist, divorce and life coach, and freedom warrior, and I'm here to help you take your power back. Because the system isn't going to save us. We need to save ourselves. So grab your coffee, your courage, and maybe a few curse words. It's time to wake up. Welcome, everybody, to Girl Wake Up. Today's episode is called How Narcissists Trap Us. Because narcissistic abuse is a trap you don't see really until you're in it. I've been in it. I know this episode is also about how women wake up, break free, and come back stronger. My guest today, Vanessa Reiser, is an amazing comeback story. She's a therapist who specializes in narcissistic abuse. She's also a woman who's rebuilt her life after experiencing it herself. She specializes in narcissistic and cult abuse, is licensed in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Florida. And she is the founder of Therapist. You can see that behind her. And the author of this book, isn't it beautiful? For those of you who can see on YouTube, Narcissistic Abuse, a therapist's guide to identifying, escaping, and healing from toxic and manipulative people. She's a two-time Ironman and endurance advocate. Vanessa gained national attention. I'll never forget seeing your photo in the New York Times, right? Running across New York State in a wedding dress to raise awareness about narcissistic abuse. And that's a big state. I grew up on a dairy farm in upstate New York. People don't think there's a whole state up there, but there is, right? And she's doing this in multiple states. So welcome, Vanessa. Thank you so much for being here on Girl Wake Up.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
And, you know, you and I share a lot of the same views about what's going on in our world today, especially with women's rights. And one of the reasons I started this podcast was just seeing that our systems are failing us more and more. Culturally, we're experiencing some things that are not great for women. And I thought we've got to band together. We've got to help each other. We've got to look out for each other and educate each other. Do you want to talk about that at all before we get started?
Sure. I think, moreover, yes, we have to lock arms and raise awareness for some of the systemic issues that we're all experiencing. But I think also we need men to come forward and support this cause because they are the people who are in positions of power. And there are a lot of men that get victimized by narcissistic men. Right. We saw this with the Kevin Spacey story, and we saw this with P.Diddy. And they're sort of like, in the shadows, not engaging on the battle lines with us. We saw this with the Catholic Church. How many young boys were enduring, being victimized. So, yes, women need to, do the things and, shout about this and try to make change. But really, we need people in positions of power to come out and lock arms with us because we have not had so much success on our own. So, I think it's really important that men who have been victimized by narcissistic men come forward. And I'll tell you why that's important, because a lot of them come forward and say, I was victimized by narcissistic women. It's really the power dynamic here. It's much more of a macro issue. This is about control. And so it's hard for the layman sometimes to understand those control variables, but that's really what it comes down to. It comes down to control.
I agree with you 100%. And I know in your book, I have a couple places marked, but I love when you say narcissists seldom change and they definitely rarely heal. In other words, they can practice new behaviors, but they will not change their behaviors. It is a rigid disorder, right? Will you tell us how your experience with narcissistic abuse started?
Sure. I was working in the Bronx at an outpatient mental health clinic in 2018, doing the New York social worker things that we all start out doing. Loved it. It was dealing with people who were in the foster care system and trauma, and it was extremely fast paced and dynamic. And then I started this relationship and I started to think, there's something wrong with this person because they could never be satiated. There was always this like argument, and it was very cyclical. And I used to say to him, like, if we could just go 2 weeks, like, and, the same things would start again. There would be some kind of a tension building, and then this argument, and then the love bombing phase would start. And I finally just couldn't take it anymore because I was giving so much of myself and it just wasn't enough. And I would sit and talk to him about his behavior ad nauseum, like just beating a dead dog, just all the time for hours and just going in circles. And it started to make me even stutter. I started to like just glitch. I couldn't manage the confusion that I was experiencing.
Wow, you feel like you're going crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and this happens to, as we know, smart women like you.
Yeah, and I was being gaslit, and for me, the gaslighting was very much the circular conversations, the repetition, the nonsensical deflection, and, it was just, I could not make sense of anything that was being said, and it just wasn't adding up. So when I finally decided to leave, it was only in the rearview mirror that I was able to do the math of it. I started to kind of research the things that I was experiencing. That in conjunction with his ex-wife telling me, I want you to stay there with my children, because he had the children, and you know how that goes. And so she told me, and I didn't even know what it meant at the time, having studied, to become a social worker and get my master's at USC, which is one of the top institutions. And I have a very large student loan to this day. But nothing was ever taught to me as a clinician about, this kind of a pathological personality disorder. We see in the DSM-5, it's like, okay, entitled, or not this kind of like recipe that Romani, shares with us, like all of these numerous things in conjunction,
right?
Add up to this master manipulator. And they're very hard to detect in many cases in terms of them being very covert. This is not necessarily like a physical, a physical attack. And so it's very insidious. And that's how I figured out. I kind of actually learned on TikTok, quite honestly.
I remember watching YouTube videos of Dr. Romani and other people. Like, am I crazy, or is this situation crazy, right? You need almost like a buddy. And that's what led both of us to do what we do, right? I thought I never had a coach through my divorce. When you're divorcing a narcissist, we know it's like no other kind of divorce out there, right? And for you had lived through it, and it brought you to help people going through it.
Yeah, I became like... I had this moment where I thought, because of my work, I have to make noise about this. I feel like it's my absolute obligation, because if I didn't know, then there has to be teams of people who just have no idea what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I knew at this point too, that I was not co-parenting with one. And I thought that was the magic. That was like, that I knew I had a voice that I was going to have to use. So that's when I decided to put on my sneakers and get to the pavement.
And why do you think, for all the women out there listening who we want to educate, who may be out there dating, or maybe they're in a relationship and they have that gnawing feeling like we all did, that something is just not quite right? Why do narcissistic relationships often feel deeper or more intense than healthy ones at first?
I mean, it feels like it's too good to be true. It feels like they are studying you, and they are mirroring you, and they are sort of determining what kinds of things would make you feel incredibly dopamined up. So they know how to manipulate. They know exactly what to say and do to get you to, fall in line. To get you to kind of do the things they want you to do. They know what to say and do to exploit things from you. And so you're not dealing with somebody who's neurotypical. These are people that are corrupt in the brain. The brain is operating differently. I think that people really have a hard time with this specific thing. And I think it's the first line in my book, actually. It's like, most of my clients really have the biggest barrier in trying to identify that someone else's brain is working differently. And as clinicians, like, I'll talk to, Romani and Nadine about some of these things, and Christine also. But what really, when you start to work with people in a clinical setting, you bump elbows with schizophrenics, and you bump elbows, you start to see real, manifestations of the brain working differently. So you have a little bit of an understanding of that. Whereas like a layman may not, they may not understand that brains are really working differently. I mean, look at Ted Bundy, very unassuming. Keith Raniere, very unassuming. To look at this person, they don't look like a monster, so you kind of have to get past this idea that it looks like a functioning person. Their brain must work like mine. It doesn't. We see this with even a very sort of oversimplified version of this would be like, somebody who has autism. You can tell sometimes,
Right.
not always, but this idea that their brain is working differently is a big barrier for people.
I see that in divorce coaching all the time. I mean, I have clients who are past the divorce, the ink has dried on the agreement, right? But it is really difficult for them to accept that they were married to someone who was so duplicitous, right? Like to wrap their heads around it, because I'm not saying every person who's fallen for a narcissist is perfect, of course, but by and large, a lot of us are empathetic and kind, and we operate in the world thinking everybody else is to some degree, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the thing. It's like you grow up with Sesame Street, like do unto others, this kind of stuff. And so you imagine people have that same mindset, and they don't. We see children clinically who are diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, which is a prerequisite to sociopathy, harming animals, lighting fires in a very young age. So this doesn't just show up necessarily at some age and like they're just randomly all of a sudden a narcissist. These are things that they're figuring out at a young age, in my opinion, where they see what works. Oh, I was able to get this person to do that when I did this. Oh, if I feign, if I start to cry, if I start to play, they begin to develop these skills to manipulate to get what they want. And I don't think it shows up at a late date, but that's how they're thinking. It's not how necessarily my clients are thinking, but that's how they're thinking.
And how do you help a client, Vanessa, extricate themselves from this situation? Because it's like quicksand, right? And we know that it takes on average 7 times for someone to leave an abusive relationship. I went back, I look back and think, what was I thinking? But at the moment, they are so good at convincing you. They will use whatever, the children, the, promises, future faking to get you back, guilt, love bombing all over again. Like, how do they get out?
For many, this is a disembodiment. It's like jumping off a cliff. I mean, it's very, very scary. You will free fall. It is the scariest thing. And I think the biggest issue, not that there aren't other issues like finances and children and other, layered issues. The biggest issue I see people having is this really, sort of treacherous trauma bond. And people don't really often understand what a trauma bond is. It is not being bonded by trauma. Trauma bond has been likened to having an addiction to an opiate or cocaine. Basically, what happens in the cycle of abuse is you have the love bombing, the devalue, and the discard. Or the second time around, it might look like this: the makeup session, the tension building, the fallout. The makeup session, the tension building, the fallout. And round you go. And what happens is you become addicted to the makeup session, which may only have to include the removal of the silent treatment. That's all it needs to be. And that will feel like a love bomb over time. Like, oh, thank God we're not arguing anymore, right? This feeling of like, that becomes the love bomb in the cycle of abuse. And you become addicted to that. So in order to break that cycle, it's challenging. It's just like, coming off of drugs. I mean, you can't just say to a drug addict, hey, you know what, you should just cut that out. Like, you'll be fine. I mean, There's steps to this. It's really dynamic. You need support. For me, the way that I kind of tell my clients to manage this is to develop a list of things that the narcissist did to you and a list of things that you love about yourself. And the things that you love about yourself should not be contingent upon how other people experience you. So we don't want to do that caring, loving, codependent stuff for this exercise. It has to be, I'm smart, I'm strong, I'm creative, because you want to stay away from the codependent kind of experience. And what that should do is it should shift the power from the narcissist being in this position of power, you make this list of the things they've done and they become really gross, the potato, the disgusting person that they are. And then you start to level up, right? So this shifting should help you to break away from this, like, idolizing this person and they're so wonderful and all of the crap that they've fed you. You really need to get into a space where you're in power and they're not.
Right. And it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, right? I love the fact that in your book, you bring up cults a lot because it is kind of like being in a cult of one, right? Though they could have other women, as we know many of them do. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So this is another Psych 101 kind of thing. If you ever took a psychology class, you learned about Pavlov's dogs and like this idea that there would be some kind of an intrinsic value in like food, and the bell would be rung at the same time they would give food, and they end up figuring out that the dog would salivate even just at the sound of the bell. So it didn't need to have the food. So what happens with human beings, and we are very much like Pavlov's dogs, so we will be responding to reinforcers. We will be responding to positive and negative reinforcers, very much in that vein. So none of us are immune to mind control. All of us are vulnerable to those kinds of scenarios. We see that in bigger cults. But yeah, being in a relationship with a narcissist is to be in a cult. And when I had that aha moment, I was talking to Mark Vicente from the Nexium cult.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, I was in a cult. And like, nobody says I'm in a cult. Like when you're in a cult, you're like, oh yeah, I love this cult. I mean, it's so bizarre, and the book is really aimed to destigmatize that experience because that's all it is. You're in a cult. You're either in a cult of one, a cult of a few, as you mentioned, if there's a gaggle of supply. You can be in a family cultic system with a narcissist at the helm. And then we see it in very large political climate, stuff like that. But it is exactly that. It is a cult.
And, your book covers recovering, like breaking the cycle, getting over narcissistic abuse. What are some tips you would give women for that?
Yeah, I think in dialectical behavioral therapy, we go to the five senses. If we want to get grounded or if we want to remember who we are, we become attached to things like images that are particularly nostalgic, or a meal that smells like our childhood, or a song that reminds us of things. So that's when you become connected to who you really are. And what they do is they remove that you become not who you are. You lose yourself. So you want to kind of go back to who that person is. If you are growing up in a cult, it's a little bit more challenging. Or if you have a narcissistic parent, it's a little more challenging because then you really have to build out who you are. You have to develop a sense of identity. And that's it's a scary uphill battle, but it's also extremely exciting. You have a blank slate, like here goes, what are we going to do here? What do I really like to do? And then you have to run those thoughts through the lens of like, who you are versus, well, I don't want to do that because my mom told me I shouldn't do that. Or I'm going to do that because my mom told me I shouldn't do that. Either way, mom, who is the toxic mom in this scenario, still has control over your thoughts, right? You have to sort of really pause and ask yourself, do I really want to buy that red car? Why do I want to buy that red car? Or why do I want to do that thing? And kind of really think about the why of it versus like, well, I want to go opposed to my mother who was toxic, or I want to go with her. Like you have to kind of reclaim each and every one of your thoughts, which is a big undertaking. But for the vast majority of people, they just have to go find that person they were before and kind of try to get connected to that person.
That's one of the most gratifying parts of divorce coaching, right? Is once I get a woman through that. And, some of the women I work with have been stay-at-home moms for 20, 25 years. They've been in narcissistic relationships and they need to discover who they were before. They've given up so much for the family and sacrificed. And so whether it's a job or it's a hobby or it's a passion or a cause or whatever it is, some are writing, some are painting, some are changing careers or getting back into the workforce. It's great to see that, to see them come alive again, right?
Yeah, that's phenomenal. I mean, it's very also not so uncommon. It's very common for women who haven't even gone through narcissistic abuse to have a rebirth after the children are grown too, so that they wouldn't feel so alone in that experience. It's not necessarily that you had this experience with a narcissist that you would want to, recreate or reinvent yourself at this point in your life.
Right. You mentioned narcissistic parents, right, Vanessa? There's a lot going on, a lot of discussion about this these days, right? About kids who go no contact with parents. And, there's two sides of it where some say, oh, they're being too hasty, they're not appreciating their parents. On the other side, there are abuse victims who say, this was a toxic relationship. I had to end it to save myself. I'm curious what you've thought of all this coverage recently in doing what you do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, taking care of yourself first. And so if that includes moving away from anybody who's toxic, it doesn't matter. Just because somebody procreates does not make them a good parent. And there are plenty of toxic people right now out there, even if they're well-intentioned, who are just parenting, kind of raw dogging it with no idea of what they're doing.
That's a great term for it.
Yeah. So I don't, just because you procreate doesn't make you a parent. And I think that is something societally that we put on people. It's like, oh, but that's your mom, or, oh, but that's your dad,
Absolutely.
or, oh, but that's your sister, or, oh, but, this narrative doesn't help anything. And so if someone says that to you, you might want to consider moving away from those invalidating conversations, because, if you're like the black sheep and you leave a family, generally you're the truth teller. Just because you're outnumbered, it doesn't mean that the truth has changed. This idea that, everybody else thinks something means nothing to me, and it should mean nothing to you. How do you think people feel when they leave a cult and they turn around and they have to abandon their own children and parents, and they know the truth? It doesn't change the truth that you're outnumbered.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that. It's just like a cult, right?
Yep.
But in a family unit. So I agree with you 100%. I'm curious if you think that there's more awareness, obviously, about narcissistic abuse these days. I remember an attorney said to me once, and I didn't like this, when she said, everybody who comes into my office, every woman who comes in here says she's married to a narcissist. So yes, the term has been thrown around a lot, but if you've been in a relationship with one, it's the real deal. How destructive it can be emotionally, physically, financially, right? I see women who it takes them a long time to get back up on their feet. I'm curious what you think of the state of things in our culture today.
I think there are a lot more of them than people realize. And so I always try to hold space, and I don't love, and you'll never hear me say that, ever. I will never say that, because I think there are a lot more than we realize, because the thing that makes it really wonky is that they come in different shapes and sizes. This isn't just the sort of pop collar, Ferrari driving, quintessential douchebag that you are like, oh, we got a live one. No, sometimes they look like, poets, priests, and politicians. They are kissing babies and stabbing you in the back. Like, just that neighbor that has the perfectly manicured lawn and, comes to every single, dinner. That doesn't mean anything. So they come in different shapes and sizes, and it's very hard for me to imagine judging anybody, because it's dynamic. I don't know. The covert is really where the rubber meets the road for me. Those people are the scariest.
I've survived covert, so I know exactly what it's like. And I coined this term because I experienced this with my clients so much, the holiday card narcissist, right? Who he zooms in on the weekends, takes a picture with the family, looks great at the country club or wherever else around town, that he's a great dad and he's a great husband, and he's doing whatever the heck he wants, really. I see a common theme with my clients' husbands that many of them just want to be frat boys, really.
Yeah.
They want to play video games, drink, get together with women, travel, and live out of a hotel, perhaps.
And I think the problem with that is that, the overt narcissist might punch you in the face, and there's sort of this acute trauma. And generally, and not always, generally people will have enough sense in those scenarios to get the hell out of there. Where the covert narcissist is going to rob you of this really important thing that we have in life called time.
Yes.
And that's the biggest criminal experience because it's death by a zillion cuts. And you wake up with a covert narcissist 30 years into the relationship. So I would prefer to date an overt because then at least I know this fool's going to do something dumb. I'm out. So this kind of thing. So it's the time of it. I just feel so terrible when I see people, struggling with decades lost because of those relationships.
Exactly. So I want to move on to a segment we have here on Girl Wake Up where I share a common societal message women hear, and we have our guest react to it, and you can say whether it's truth or trap. This one is narcissists prey on weak women.
That's a trap. Narcissists, in my opinion, don't prey on anyone. I think that they throw out they cast out a bunch of lines. So what does that mean? In there's going to be the empath. In there's going to be the person who's maybe famous. In there is going to be the person who's a lawyer, a therapist, a giver, a house cleaner, a toilet bowl, whatever they want to exploit, because they generally have a gaggle of supply. It's not just one person. They can even exploit their own children for supply. So I don't see it the same way. I think that they are gleaning energy. They're taking energy. They're sycophants from a host of different people. They generally have a main supply, and that main supply may have characteristics that they're particularly interested in. But generally, I see them as fishermen or fisherwomen, and they're just casting out these lines. Are you going to feed me attention or not? And that's how I think of it. Versus, they're only seeking out empaths because they don't always. Sometimes they find themselves with really toxic partners as well.
Right.
And they're exploiting, different things there. So I see it as more like if the boundaries aren't there and you don't know what you're looking at, you can fall victim to it.
I think that is a great analogy because we see this all the time. And people will often ask me, well, why did he do this then? And why did he do? And I say over and over again to my clients, he did whatever suited him at that moment, whatever got him that narcissistic fuel at that moment. That's why there's no rhyme or reason to anything, because they're just living in the moment, impulsively going on that, right?
Yep. And they'll lie to get out of the thing, and then they'll giggle about, oh my God, she bought it. They kind of like, attaboy, they did it again, this kind of thing. So it doesn't matter how much you corner them, they're going to wiggle and squirm and slither away.
It's a challenge. Yeah, we had Tanya Bales and, the Dirty John story, right? We had her on.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she is incredible. And then her book is incredible because you learn even more of what she went through and all his shenanigans. But I want to end with our listener letter. We had a woman from my support group actually write in who knew you were going to be a guest. And she said, "Hi, Amy and Vanessa. I feel like I'm going crazy. From the outside, my relationship looks fine, but I'm constantly questioning myself. He tells me I'm too sensitive, that I remember things wrong, that I create problems. I used to be a confident person. Now I rehearse conversations so I don't upset him. I even find myself apologizing. When things are good, they're amazing. And when they're bad, I feel guilty for even questioning him. Keep thinking maybe it's me. How do I know who is right and when it's time to stop trying?" Sarah.
Yeah, it's not you. One of the things that is glaring about that statement for me was too sensitive. This is really a devalue. It is a beautiful thing to be sensitive. It is a tremendous and human experience to be empathetic. And, we need empathy to survive as a species. Without empathy, the baby is born, the baby cries, the primary caregiver does nothing, the baby dies, and it's over. I mean, this idea that being too sensitive is absolutely absurd. And so I think people think that, being narcissistic, maybe even at this point in time, is like a flex or something, but it really isn't. Empathy is a flex. Being sensitive is a flex. So anytime someone tells you you're too sensitive, that is a scarlet red flag.
That's funny you say that, because I don't know if you saw on social media, my son is 17 and started this t-shirt company called Lead the Change, trying to create a kinder world. And one of his t-shirts is about empathy. And he posted something like, empathy is the real flex, right? That's what we need to see. But in this case, in Sarah's case, she is experiencing gaslighting, right? I mean, that's when you feel like you are losing it, right? You know something's wrong, but every time you confront them, it's word salad and they twist it all around. So this is just a typical narcissistic abuse situation.
Yeah. If you are experiencing the truth and somebody tries to bend that, you have to get away. It's an injury to your brain. I'm not kidding. Right. I mean, it will actually, the brain is a fact-finding instrument. And when you start to do that, you're going to fracture, you're going to have damage. And that will manifest in physical illnesses, high levels of cortisol. It is absolutely dangerous. So, I'm a big fan of, getting away from these kinds of people.
Absolutely. We've covered so much. Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up today?
No,
any message for women? Okay.
I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me. I think the number one message I would say to women is I believe you.
No. And they need to hear that more than ever these days, right? That there are people out there who do. Where can people find you, Vanessa?
Sure. My website is teletherapist.net. That's TELLA therapist. And at Vanessa Reiser, LCSW on Instagram.
Great. So I hope you'll follow her. I hope you'll get her book. I've recommended it to so many of my clients. And it's just incredible. So thank you for being here. Just a reminder to everybody, I do free 15-minute coaching consultations. You can book on my website, freedomwarrior.info, and I help women before, during, and after divorce. But thank you for being here, Vanessa. We're going to continue to wake women up on Girl Wake Up, and I'm thrilled that you were part of it and one of our first guests. So
thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Girl Wake Up. I'm your host, Amy Polacko. If this episode woke something up in you, don't let it fade. Share it with a friend who needs to hear it, leave a review, and keep this conversation going. Remember, no one's coming to save you, so she did.